Hello and welcome to the Who the Fuck is in the Mirror podcast. I'm Angela Spooner, your host, emotional intelligence guide, trauma-informed coach, yoga instructor, confident, badass single mom of 3 amazing children, and founder of Unabashedly You. This podcast is all about using books, analogies, and metaphors to dive deep into who you really are to yourselves, not just as parents or some fictional version others made you out to be, right? But who the fuck you are. I want you to find your confidently badass, secure version of you that you lost along the way, or maybe you never even had in the first place because you were busy with everyone and everything else. Does that sound about right? So how about we get into the science of why we are a bunch of fucked up individuals who look in the mirror and don't even recognize the person that's staring back. Join me in the best journey you'll ever experience. Why, you may ask? Because it is the journey to transform your self-doubt, insecurity, and overall dysfunctional brain into self-aware, badass confidence and understanding. I hope you're as excited as I am because I cannot wait to get into this.
Welcome to the carnival. Welcome to the carnival.
Hey everybody! Woo woo! Episode 3 of Who the Fuck is in the Mirror. You're welcome. That's right. It's like singing in the shower, only everybody gets to hear it. You're all welcome. So I'm hyping you up because now we're going to talk about some serious fucking shit, right? First off, let me fucking tell you, I tried recording. So it's like a whole thing, okay? I tried to do an interview with a veteran, and it was like an hour long. And I was like, fuck, I'm going to have to cut this all down, right? Well, my phone did not save it. And so I didn't know. And I came to get the woman's side, his wife's side of things, right? And that was another 45 minutes. And I was like, I'm going to have to cut all kinds of stuff, right? Wrong. Fucking wrong, because his never recorded. And her and I had a whole conversation. And the whole time we were referring to the conversation that we had with him. So this is how shit happens in life, right? It fucks with you to piss you off and to make you give up. So in other words, I'm telling you this because I want you to understand that we are not going to have the veteran here. However, the information that he did give us, and by us, I mean me and his wife, are going to help us with our interview today. But first, let's go ahead and jump into my take on things. And then we will have the wife come in. The wife, that sounds weird. We'll have her come in and she can give us some takes on what she's experienced and some stuff that we heard her husband mention. Okay. So, lessons from Vietnam veterans. All right. So, trauma, Kolk says, interrupts the plot. It just happens. And then life goes on. No one prepares you for it. The whole issue with trauma is that it happens at any given moment in your life, right? Think of a personal experience that was traumatic for you. Don't think into the details of it, okay? Because this isn't an actual therapy session, but rather we're looking at how it fucking hits you out of nowhere. Honestly, even when you're expecting it, it'll hit you so hard, right? But then everything around you just keeps moving and going on. It's so fucking frustrating because you're like, I don't even have time to process. And they're like, I'm sorry, but next customer, thank you. Right. So Remember how we talked about our heart rates increasing? We don't even realize our anxiety goes up with certain triggers. That's kind of this is why you get those things, right? Because you don't get to process properly. Everything keeps going, especially in today's society. Everything's going at like full-blown full speed ahead, right? That's what's happening right now. So, when that happens, our bodies actually become so dysregulated after the trauma has occurred that we have no idea how or why we are experiencing all these odd fucking feelings, right? So Colt gives the story of a disheveled man. He talks about on the 4th of July, he spent drinking in his law office that he had, and he was looking at photos of his kids and his wife because he was afraid that he would behave like a monster to them. The reason for that because the noises and smells reminded him of the war, and even the sounds of his kids made him agitated. So I know I didn't go to war, but my life has been a war zone, right? So I know I personally experienced this with my own kids before I began working on myself. I mean, even now I still get super triggered by certain things. They could have even been playing and laughing, having a good time, and just being fucking kids. But it really got under my skin and I'd snap at them. Stop fucking being loud, And you're like, okay, well, maybe we shouldn't fucking yell at the kids for actually enjoying life, right? That's fucked up. But that's what happens. Your body is so dysregulated that you are unable to even do anything about it. It just automatic response, right? Judith Herman, she explains trauma like this. Traumatic events are extraordinary, not because they occur rarely, but rather because they overwhelm the ordinary human adaptations to life. Crazy, right? So they don't happen all the time, right? They do happen like rarely, or in my case, they happen a lot of times, but they overwhelm your ordinary adaptations. So when you look at the gentleman in the book, right, he had all these feelings and it overwhelmed who he became. So he would have dreams about being back in the war, right? He would have dreams of people he knew, like they would just die around him. He would watch as children were murdered right in front of him. He was honorably discharged, and he would think he would get to go home. Like, he's like, oh, I'm going to go home, right? I'll be fine, and I'm going to return to normal. But again, these traumatic experiences leave your body dysregulated, right? And they're too overwhelmed to function in ordinary human adaptations to life. So you can't just go on with your life and just think that it's never going to come up. And Kolk even mentions that he could understand this guy and some of his experiences because his father, he would have explosive and uncontrollable rages. Kolk talked about how his mother was affected during that, right? She was often very frightened, right? And she would have these unnerving habits of fainting. But she also had her own trauma, so it was reenacted, right? And so what she would do is she would do this hypodysregulation thing of just fucking fainting, right? He would ask her. So Kolk said that when he got older, he would ask her about her past and stuff, and she would blame him for making her upset. Why? Because if you're gonna faint when somebody triggers you, then you're obviously not going to be like, let's go ahead and talk about that, right? So that's what she would do. She would blame him for doing these things, because when you blame somebody else, as we know, you don't have to deal with it yourself, right? So he was even prescribed. So this guy, right? He was prescribed pills for his nightmares. He didn't fucking take them. Why? Because he felt like he would have abandoned his friends in combat. like mind-blowing. He literally was letting his experiences over there keep him from living his life. And he just stayed stuck because those nightmares kept that emotional connection and trauma bond, right? So so there's a lot of studies that have been happening, right? So a lot of the studies have shown that post-war leaves veterans feeling overtaken by a sense of futility. So they're withdrawn and detached. So one psychiatrist by the name of Abram Gardner, he was back in 1941. Okay, so yeah, just a few years ago, he mentioned that the nucleus of the neurosis is a physioneurosis. So in other words, Kolk says that post-traumatic stress isn't all in one's head. Okay, so like that guy with his dreams, right? He's probably thinking like, oh, it's all in my head, it's this and that, right? So as some people believe that, it also has a physiological basis. Gardner understood that even that the symptoms of their origin in the entire body's response to the original trauma. I said that wrong. Fuck me. Gardner mentions that that the symptoms have their origin in the entire body's response to the original trauma. So these responses are from that original trauma. Okay. And all these symptoms that they're having are with that too. So, I mean, it's simple when you say it, right? It's so simple, right? Let's just fix them. No, fucking wrong. Because as Kolk says, we as human beings are experts in wishful thinking and obscuring the truth. Gardner says that the greatest sources of our suffering are the lies we tell ourselves. We're so good at pushing it down, which we're going to talk about with the veteran's wife later on, that we are so good at pushing it down and obscuring the truth, right? So when we do that, it's because we are so bad at witnessing pain. We can't watch somebody else and be in pain. How many times do you watch something or you watch someone crying and you're just like, oh shit, what do I do? And you just do this like moonwalk out of the room, or you're just like silently crawling in this little hole because you can't handle their feelings and pain. And you're like, ooh, can I press a pause button on that? Because that's a lot, right? It's hard enough for us to bear witness. So like I said previously, if we can't tolerate watching that, we can't tolerate remembering it, right? The people that are actually experiencing it, imagine that. Kolk says they often resort, which is true, they resort to using drugs, alcohol, self-mutilation. They block out their unbearable knowledge because it's so hard to deal with, right? Then we look at fucking Tom, okay? Tom was this guy. He was so something. Tom was something. So Tom talks about how he was paralyzed, terrified, and enraged, right? He dealt with a lot of stuff. He had a paralyzing shame. So he actually had flashbacks of the things he did. So he had all this trauma and he ended up like being in situations where he was killing children, he was shooting an innocent farmer, and he even raped Vietnamese women. So after that, it became truly impossible for him to go home again in any meaningful way. So how do you fucking go home to your wife and tell her that you did these things, right? So in one of his experience, he had experienced a friend of his dying, and part of himself had been destroyed forever. That part that was good and honorable and trustworthy. So trauma, whether it is the result of something done to you or something you yourself have done, almost always makes it difficult to engage in intimate relationships. It takes enormous trust and courage to remember these experiences. Okay. And then you have these issues in engaging appropriately in intimate relationships because you're not yourself anymore and you don't know how to deal with situations because situations in life have given you a shit card. And because you can't process it and you're supposed to just go back to normal, you push it down and you become this completely different person, which is what I experienced. I was a completely different person where I didn't even know who the fuck I was anymore. I didn't even recognize what I was, who I was. None of it was familiar to me. And it took a lot of courage and trust to remember. And it was more so trust with myself because it's hard to trust others when you can't trust yourself. So deep down, many traumatized people are even more haunted by the shame they feel about what they themselves did or did not do under the circumstances. Just like that guy, he did these things because he was in pain. I've done a shit ton of things that I am not proud of because of that shame, right? We don't want to feel it. And so let's numb it and let's go have sex with this person or let's numb it. And I would do that, and I remember one of my exes telling me like, I haven't slept with anybody since we broke up. Why have you? And I remember telling him because I was fucking broken, and giving yourself that grace to accept those parts of you takes big amounts of courage. Hey, sexy ladies. That's right. I'm talking to you moms. Are you ready to prioritize you, not your kids, for my 6-week challenge? That's right, everybody. It's finally here. This is my 6-week challenge to prioritize you moms, not your kids, and reclaim your badass confidence. On May 14th, I will be taking the 10 founding members for my 6-week challenge to prioritize you and kick off their journey working closely with me to achieve becoming a confidently self-aware badass woman and mom without the shame and blame taking control. I know you're probably thinking that this isn't the program for you, but let me tell you, this program is specifically designed for moms to put an end to feeling unappreciated, unattractive, and agitated easily with their kids, partners, and potential partners. It's designed for moms who've tried mommy juice. You know what I'm talking about, girl. Lecturing kids, yelling at kids to respect you, or trying to control their every move. Crying by yourself, working out, but you drop it because it was too stressful with the kids. Diet, but that was dropped because you stress eat. Unhealthy relationships or unhealthy behaviors in your already relationship, and you still haven't been able to feel calm, sexy, and powerfully confident as a woman and as a mom, and you want to have people magnetized by your energy. I am accepting applications until April 27th. That's right, this Saturday. Take that step with me to reclaim your confident you, and let's start on that journey together. moving on, I'm going to go ahead and bring in the wife. I like it how I say that, right? Who's going to give us some examples of what she's experienced and her husband have experienced. And some of the things he honestly didn't even realize about himself in the beginning. Isn't that right, Christina?
Still hasn't in a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he's realized more, but he's still getting there. It takes a lot of self-reflection. People don't want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
that's
And
the hardest step.
right. The hardest step, it's like AA, right? Where you're like, first step is admitting you have a problem. And you're like, that's actually fucking valid.
Yeah.
And it sucks ass.
Yeah.
Because as human beings, our ego gets in the way so badly. And then we have that shame of, I don't want people to see that side of us, right? But we don't even realize they see that worst side of us.
Well, with men especially, there's that stigma. You're not a manly man. You're not a man if you acknowledge, if you feel, if you... I mean, it's even worse in that regard. Especially if you're a veteran, you know, you're seen as having to be this tough brick. And after an experience like that, you're not inside, but on the outside, you still have to act.
Right.
Or else you're not a man.
Now, I know your husband, he was talking to us in our interview. He mentioned a lot about how he deals with a lot of situations because he wasn't able to give us specific examples, right? But he was able to describe that he saw some pretty graphic and traumatizing things, right? And he had to make a lot of decisions that he really regretted. And I know he said that he coped a lot by playing video games. So emotionally numb, that's probably the hardest symptom to deal with post-trauma. You're not sure what is real anymore or what's unacceptable, right? Because you've experienced these things and you're like, I don't even know how to be quote unquote normal, right? So for me, in my personal life, I had a lot of difficulty in dealing with even the thought of emotions, right? I would use drinking, smoking, getting high, numbing everything out. I've even done cocaine a few times in the past, you know, like you numb what you can't deal with. I was completely oblivious to any and all the warning signs that I might actually need help. I remember the faces of loved ones, even now. They seem so distant. Like, even up close, it felt like this out-of-body experience where you're like, I don't even know who the fuck I am, and I don't know how did I get here.
You stand right in front of them and they're a world away. Type thing. Like they're just not even in the same galaxy.
Do you feel that with your husband sometimes?
Sometimes, I guess. I feel like he probably feels that more on his end, though, looking at other people because it's just so different from him since, you know, what he went through over there. It's a lot different than... I don't necessarily feel it with him directly all the time. I guess every now and again when he gets in that place, but he's going back to that place for himself, and that's what kind of creates that distance. So I feel like it's probably more on his end that he totally feels a world away from everybody he interacts with.
But that's what I'm saying is that do you see
do
you see some of that where he is emotionally trying to numb out those feelings, like playing his video games all the time, right? He's playing them so that he doesn't have to feel.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we had talked about was how he kind of got re-triggered in a sense, right? He said that he had these moments here and there where he felt like there was a trigger, right? But this one was more substantial, right? And he mentioned an experience where his father ruined the trust, right? And it was an experience with you and his father where his father crossed boundaries and he completely like blanked out and he saw red. Can you describe that to me a little more?
Yeah, so I had called him right after the incident happened and explained he hung up on me when I was talking to him, even because he just snapped in the moment. And I knew that happened the minute he hung up on me. But then I found out later, because he did tell me, that he just started driving. And I guess he just happened to see his dad's truck and follow him to a gas station, which was serendipitous, not in a good way. But he followed him there and got in his face, and he was 2 seconds away from probably murdering him at the gas station. And he stopped himself because he was able to pull that back. But that was the experience, that he just saw red after I told him what I told him on the phone. And then he doesn't remember driving. He doesn't remember any of that. He just remembers getting there, stopping, getting in his face, and then stopping himself. And then he remembers that, once he became cognitive. But
So let's talk about that for a minute, right? Let's talk about rage attacks. When we think of rage, we see some like crazy wild person screaming at the top of their lungs, or we think of an abuser taking out his rage on his victim, right? While these are all true, I think from my own personal opinion, the rage starts more internally than anything. And most of the time, it's in your subconscious where you don't even fucking realize that it's building up, right? Trauma survivors, they don't really understand the pain that is deep within themselves. It's as if we're set on fire, but from within. You're like, you can feel the burning and you're like, I don't know how to release this, right? But you can't even verbalize that because you don't even understand or process what the fuck is going on. You're like, what the fuck? Like it's chaotic inside your brain, right? And you and I talked about that earlier about, I said something and you said something and I was about to say it and I said, oh, get out of my brain. And then we were both like, oh, you don't want to be in there. It's under construction. It's a chaotic fucking mess up in there, right? Which is true. That's what happens. It's deep within ourselves. I can picture a younger version of myself just screaming at me, pounding and beating at my chest. Like in my head, I can imagine a younger version of me sitting there and just being like, what the actual fuck are you doing? And that's one of the things when I was doing inner child work where I actually had to experience that. And I cried and cried and cried, just looking at that younger version of myself and realizing who I'd become. It brings so many emotions just thinking about it, envisioning that, right? She wanted desperately to be let out. Oftentimes we see the external chaos, but we forget the internal is the root of it all, right? So watching him do that and experience kind of those feelings and emotions where he had to like stop himself from essentially killing his father. And does it make you kind of understand more how Kolk says trauma changes people's perceptions and their imagination, right?
right, because perception is reality. So, I mean, people can say what they want, but you watch and you see what people actually do, and that's your reality. They can say, "Oh, I feel this way all day," but if what their action if that shows different, it it creates that conflict. And I feel like that's what he's feeling, is because his family says one thing, and of course they're there for him and love him, and then actions have totally proven different, obviously, since then. And it just has given him this whole whacked
perception.
Yeah. It's just messed everything up, really. So
And you mentioned it earlier, in the podcast episode where we didn't actually post that one. You remember, right, Christina? Because it happened like an hour ago. Everything's fine. But we actually talked about, so even his trauma before being a veteran, the experiences associated with before he became a veteran. You're picking up what I'm putting down.
During.
Everybody understands me, right? And am I speaking English? But he mentioned how he had a lot of issues growing up of not like brushing things under the rug, right? Which I know I personally experienced a lot of that growing up, where it's not something where those people are bad people because they brush it under the rug. It's because that's just how things used to be. Back in the day, it was, you don't talk about your feelings. You don't talk about the issues that you're experiencing. You just sit still, look pretty. You don't deal with those emotions. You got to be tough. You got to go move on, right? Like, shit just happens and we move on, just like I said at the beginning. And it's funny because Sigmund Freud says, he's talking about these guys that experience all these things, right? He says, I think this man is suffering from memories, which I think is so simply put, but so profoundly thought, because of the fact that back in the day, 1980 was when they actually started realizing what PTSD was.
Right.
So before then, all these auditory and visual hallucinations, they were saying that they were symptoms of paranoid schizophrenia. Like, I know one of the stories that Hulk talks about is a guy named Bill. He was left alone with his child, right? And he was working on a sermon. And the baby began to cry, and his sudden surge of like dying children in Vietnam, all those images took over his mental headspace. And he like had a full-blown like meltdown. And it's suffering from memories. Like, people look at that and they're like, oh my gosh, he's schizophrenic because he started like talking to himself, right? But what do we do when we're trying to process something?
Right.
We talk to ourselves, whether it's internal or external. We're talking because we're trying to rationalize. We're trying to understand. And when you don't know, you automatically assume that you're the problem. You're fucked up. There's no way to get out of it. There's no way to get past it. Instead of realizing, holy shit, I can actually change this. Which is, again, I mentioned it in the last episode, and I'll mention it every fucking episode if I have to. That is why I told the story that I told. That is why I told my experiences. And I haven't even gotten in depth with everything, right? I've had people ask me, hey, why haven't you talked more about this? Why did you only give the general of your history? You should tell more about your history, right? So that's why I have a podcast, because that's the whole point. If I were to give you every experience, all of my listeners would be so overwhelmed and overstimulated by the amount of trauma, experiences, and the knowledge put forth after them. You all would be triggered. And then I'd get a lot of hate mail of, Angela, you fucked up my whole life because I got overwhelmed and then I overprocessed and then I just became this shame pit and then I killed someone. Yes, worst case scenario, but I'm just saying it could happen. It could happen. And as I've been told most of my life, if something crazy could happen, it happens to you, Angela. I'm like, thanks. It's the sweetest thing you could ever fucking say. But it's true. It's true. So let's look at the worst case scenario and let's
Murphy's.
right.
There's that.
But it has to be done in increments. There's no way to actually heal yourself. There's no fucking pill you can take and you're fully healed, right? It's healing your internal self so that your external can shine. And the only way you can do that is by baby stepping it. I've never in my life seen a baby just jump up and start running. You know what the fuck they would do? They'd fucking fall. You cannot run until you have learned to crawl, walk briskly, and then you waddle when you first start running, right? You ever seen a baby waddle and they're just like, they're trying to run, right? But it's like this little like awkward waddle and you're like, oh, look at them. That's going to be us when we're like 80, right? Like we look at that, but that's literally the process that you have. You have all this wobbling and the more you give yourself grace and just keep working on yourself and pushing forward, the better it gets. The more you sit there and overanalyze, am I walking wrong? Am I running one? Why am I still waddling? You're going to fucking waddle the rest of your life. I'll tell you that right fucking now. You're going to waddle, just like a duck. So don't do it. Let's baby step. All right. Retracing our steps. Let's moonwalk back, as I like to say. Let's talk about the Rorschach test. I don't fucking know how to say that, guys. Basically, it is a unique way to observe how people construct a mental image from what is basically a meaningless stimulus. It's a blot of ink. What they do is they help us to determine what is going on inside the person's brain. So they actually did it to some veterans just to see, right? So in other words, they found out that triggers can be anywhere and everywhere. Bill saw the ink blot and immediately was triggered back to his trauma during Vietnam. You never know when you're going to pop up and it's going to hit you like a ton of bricks, right? The pain and anguish inside of you. Recently, my daughter, she had an episode of internal struggle, right? I was helpless as she began going to any and every form of movement to release it out of her internal screaming form. Like you could see within her, she was struggling. There was this complete block to the external world, no recognition of anyone around her, oblivious. I am telling you, it is scary to watch, but it is so hard for her to write, right? It's so hard for her to actually process things. When she draws, it's like darker images. They've gotten lighter over the years, but they used to be like stabbing people. And I was like, oh God. She used to like dissect creatures. You remember that, Christina? When she would dissect like wasps and shit. And we're like, yep, she just decapitated him. That's alarming, right? But she's gotten better. So it's a process, right? Anyway, so from these R tests, we'll call them the R test, the ink blot test. What they learned from this was that traumatized people, they have a tendency to superimpose their trauma on everything around them, and they have trouble deciphering whatever is going on around them, which is what we were just talking about. Now, for your experiences, how do you see that in your husband and some of the experiences that you've witnessed since the traumatic experience that happened? The difference. So we're doing like a compare and contrast. Him before that trigger, because what happens is that we're good, right? Or so we think.
Right.
And then something hits us. Like when I fucking bombed over to my ex and I gave him all his shit and just put it on his doorstep thinking I'm the boss, right? And then the next morning, I realized that I had ruined a picture that he had made for me and my daughter. It was of me and my daughter. And I was like, fuck you. And I was like, good job, Angela, because that was a beautiful picture.
Right.
And I just looked at who I was. I had a, walk hard moment of, I'm going to look at my whole life. And I literally looked at my whole life, right? And I realized that I needed to make that change. But I had about 3 years of being overstimulated because of the experience that happened 3 years prior with DCS,
Right.
where everything was going good prior. I got my degree. I became a licensed nurse. And then all this stuff happened with DCS, all the lies, all the gaslighting, blaming, all these things that literally make you feel insane. You watched it, how everything just kind of flipped. And I was like, am I fucking crazy right now?
There at your graduation, everything was perfect. And you moved in and we were hanging out, just having fun, just living our best fucking lives. And then all of a sudden, because he was fucking bitter that you were doing okay, it all flipped.
Everything flipped. And
overnight.
Then it got worse and worse and worse, where I'm sitting there and I'm saying, this man is very toxic and you gave the kids to him. And they're like, I think you have problem co-parenting. And I'm like, but he used to beat the shit out of me.
Right.
And it makes you feel crazy. But part of that was because I couldn't hold myself because of all the trauma that I had been through. I had always been shamed for speaking my mind. So I couldn't speak my mind. And again, we think that we're doing good.
Right.
The reality of it is that these things sometimes, and I'm not super religious.
Super self.
Right.
Is what they are inside of.
Right. And I'm not a super religious person, but I will say that God had to kick me in the fucking ass and say, Angela, I think it's time we do some work.
Right.
And I was stubborn for 3 years because I had been through a lot of trauma. So you had mentioned in the previous one about how you had to watch him, how you've had to watch him after that re-triggering where he realized that, oh, I'm being triggered by this. Right. And we could tell you guys aren't able to hear it, but he got angry and he was, he was loud when he was describing it. So watching that now, let me hear this experience.
Yeah. I mean, it was obvious, as you're saying. Anybody that knows him, at least. I don't know if it would be obvious to anybody else. Those of us that know him, like me and you, we watched it and could tell right away that the agitation, the behavior overall. But I mean, since then, yeah, it's little things here and there, but you can definitely see the decline is coming, that it's going to hit eventually. It just hasn't yet. He's just taking longer to get there. It's a long, scenic route for him, where the rest of us are already at the destination. We already know. And we're just looking back down that scenic route, down that road, waiting for him to drive up the drive. We're just waiting because we know it's coming. It just hasn't yet.
Right.
It's like we see the headlights a mile away and we know he's coming, but it just hasn't.
Right.
So I mean, that's kind of the frustration for my point, is that I know that eventually will be the thing, and I know he's getting there, but he has to get there at his own pace. You can't, what are you going to do? Push that car for him? Right.
And I know that we kind of, in our pre-recorded, we had talked about how you said, I just kind of have to be his punching bag, right? And being his punching bag is the pure definition of what
we're against.
We are against, yeah, essentially, because this is real and raw. You already know me. I don't give a shit.
I know.
Because it needs to be said. I tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. when you say that you want to be that for him, you're essentially saying that my own well-being comes after his, which is the problem.
Right.
Because we want to sit there and help everybody else. Because if we don't help everybody else, then we don't have to help ourselves.
Right.
If we are healing, essentially, then we get to be those Captain Save-A-Hos, right? Which we aren't Captain Save-A-Hos. Nobody should be a Captain Save-A-Ho unless you're actually saving a hoe. And which you should never do. Christina said, which you should never do. But if the hoe's getting beat, save the hoe, please. Hey, save the hoe.
I mean, that's
but right.
schematic.
God, Angela, just stop already. Jeez. But like, you have to take care of yourself. Fucking oxygen mask. You cannot be there for somebody else.
Right.
You can't have a gash in your own fucking leg and have empathy for a child that falls down.
And I think it's especially
I mean, you can,
hard.
but that's pretty.
I think it's especially hard when it goes both ways. Because, like, when that whole thing happened with his dad, he was trying to be there for me. And then also his mom, but he has his own shit going on.
And he didn't want to work on that.
Flip the switch, and now it's the opposite. And now it's like convoluted beyond repair almost, because nobody had a chance to focus on their own feelings about that whole situation. Not one person did.
Do you notice there where you said beyond repair almost?
Almost, right? Because there is still hope, but
there is always hope.
It's so far that it's going to take a rock bottom and somebody snapping before it switches, probably.
Right.
That's just, I mean, pessimism on my part, but who can blame a person to feel that way when it's always been that way?
Well, and definitely because we have so many avenues for numbing it, people don't like talking about the issues they're facing now. They don't like talking about like, oh, I have a drinking problem. We make jokes about it. We post on social media all the jokes about fuck you bitches and this and that, right? But when you get down to it and you're like, let's fucking talk about this. They're like, whoa. What about your overuse of these enabling resources, right? How about sex? It releases quick dopamine for the instant gratification. Okay. So how many of us have used sex? I'm raising my hand. You guys can't see me, but I'm fucking raising my hand because I used to do that. I couldn't feel the emotions. So it was easier for me to get that instant gratification than to actually have to sit with having a conversation with someone. So for instances like with your husband, right? Do you see him playing on his video games more?
Yeah.
Do you see him becoming shorter with his behaviors with his kids, or just in general with you, where he's a lot more triggered by things?
Yeah. Definitely. I mean, it just ever since that whole
situation
with the family, it's both of us. It's not even just him. It's a constant trigger for everybody involved, really. But yeah, I mean.
So just like it's very difficult for growing children to recover when the source of terror and pain is not enemy combatants, but their own caretakers, and they have a lot of issues as they're trying to recover, right? And it's hard for them to process. It's the same way for adults trying to recover. But it's even harder because kids are resilient and they're still processing and they're still learning, right? Over the years, they can still rewire essentially and retrain their brains to handle their issues in a more healthy way. When you're an adult and you're trying to do those things, it's it's a lot harder because Kolk says that the trauma results in a fundamental reorganization of the way mind and brain manages their perceptions, right? And we talked about that earlier. Their perceptions change, right? It makes this imprint on our minds, and it affects our inner, like our sensations inside and our relationships to the physical reality around us. So with someone that is being re-triggered, they're going to try to push it down more, right? Because kids are curious. It's easier for them,
Right.
to dive into it without feeling like, ugh, right? When you're older, you got that ego where you're like, I know everything, right? And so you're like, this is how I cope. This is how I do things. And the idea of doing anything outside of that is inconceivable. Right? Princess Bride, guys. That was Princess Bride. For those of you. You're welcome. So, see, that's how I do it, right? I cope with
humor.
Yeah, I cope with situations with humor. And I am still learning that serious moments need to be serious. I don't think that all of them need to be serious. I think that humor is a very great way to deal with your fucked up shit. That is literally how I make jokes about it, because I'm like, shit's hard. So why do you have to always have a exterior of being hard? You don't have to. But in order for real change to take place, the body needs to learn that the danger has passed and to live in the reality of the present. That was not my words. That was Kolk, just in case anybody wants to say anything. That was not me. But it is living in that present moment and processing those things that allow us to live more fulfilling lives. And for your husband, I know it's very difficult to find that balance, right? Because you want to help them, but then you can't. It's not your job. So would the best way for you to handle it, not so much to be the punching bag, right? Because we have our boundaries and we realize that we are important as individuals. And at the end of the day, people come and go. You remain constant with you. So you have to be able to live with your actions and what you believe to be true, right? So would it be safe to say not really that you should be his punching bag, but you can be the example of boundary setting, opening up, realizing, actually, I don't have to deal with that. Actually, I don't have to sit here and let you treat me as a punching bag, because I'm worth it. If L'Oreal says it, I believe it.
Great.
Right? But it's true, not if L'Oreal says it.
And I
but
do in my normal life. I mean, that's why they call me the pit bull in the business. They don't want to tell people no in the business. They put me on that because they know I will. I'll protect them. I'll protect me with customers and with people that want to have an attitude they have no right to have. Like, I am quick to it. No qualms given on this end. Because they're too nice. Like, that, they put me on that on purpose. They know I'm that way. So I do try to show that in my everyday life, that I'm willing to do that. But yeah, with people you care about, it's a little different. Like someone you don't know, or a customer, or somebody you may never have to fucking see again. Like, it's a little different.
I think the difference,
But
I think the difference though is not, it's It's that we are afraid of change. We are afraid of what will happen if I put that boundary up.
Right.
But what most people don't realize is having that boundary up is what people ultimately do respect.
Right.
Because they know that you can hold yourself. You can value yourself. You can actually set those boundaries.
Right.
Who are they going to look to when shit hits the fan? Right? The whole purpose is to teach people to look at themselves by example. It's like me trying to tell my kids to do something, right? They're not going to fucking listen to me. They will if I can sit there and actually show them that what I'm saying and what I'm doing does have its benefits.
Right.
By my actions, my reactions, my behaviors, my tone, all of those things show, oh, if mom can do that, I can do that. So with your husband going through this process of him realizing that essentially he has a problem, right? Is it's going into a deeper version within yourself as well, and a deeper a balance, a deeper understanding of the balance that you're going to have, where you are understanding him, but you're also valuing you
Right.
and what you know you want to deal with. And as you grow, you actually understand that you don't have to do those things. And somebody that truly values you will not expect you to do those things because they know that you're worth them honoring you and validating you by their own actions of themselves.
Right. And not even between us though. The biggest thing is between him and his family. That is the problem. They don't show that. They don't do that with him.
And
with their actions. And that just validates more and more and more the pushing down, pushing down, pushing down.
but again,
The self-hate almost.
but again, who are you in control of?
Yourself. Yeah.
Right. So the biggest thing is yourself.
Right.
If somebody is not treating you right, it is better to have 1 year of amazing, blissful happiness than 20 years of saying, I wish I had done this. I wish I had done that. And the reason I am saying that is because I am living proof.
Right.
I don't even have a full year under my belt of my changes. And I can already tell you the time that I've spent right now of cutting out essentially the fat of my life, it is the most rewarding experience that I could ever imagine having. And the reason I'm saying this is because the more you start to grow and heal yourself, the more these people around you don't affect you.
Right.
They're still going to piss you off and, frustrate you because sometimes people are just like stupid. You're like, are you a fucking idiot?
Right.
Are you like, did you wake up this morning and say, I'm going to be a fucking dumbass today? Or I'm going to be a fucking tool and just piss everybody off? Am I going to do this or like, am I going to call this mom a million times while I know she's working because your son has a headache?
Right.
And that's not to say, they're idiots, but I'm just saying those are things that will trigger you in life. The biggest thing is that you cut out the fat so that those things don't trigger you, or you can see them and be like, it actually doesn't affect me. or you understand about yourself. Oh, I'm getting triggered by it because I have to start remembering to put my phone on do not disturb when I'm working, or, things like that. If you know yourself, you know how to react with other people.
Right.
And you know that some people, you cannot change anyone. So some people cannot be in your space at the level that they are at.
Right.
And I think that that is the best way to deal with a loved one that is going through some of the things that your husband
That's
has to
like
deal with.
somebody once said, and I forget who said it, but it was like one of the most profound things I've ever heard. They said, I'm not going to let you starve, but you don't get to sit at my table.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, yeah.
Exactly.
Like, I'm not going to watch you suffer, but you don't get the reward of sitting with me.
Which is what we were just talking about.
Right.
Understanding somebody's pain,
Right.
so that you can better
You can
understand
have
and not
empathy
be
and not let them be a
exactly.
jackass to you.
Exactly.
Right.
Empathy is just that, empathy.
Right.
You can be empathetic of someone and not get in their fucking boat with them.
Right. Because their ship is sinking. You can empathize with that. That doesn't mean you get in the sinking ship.
Exactly. So with that, we're going to conclude this episode. It's a lot longer than the other ones, but I feel like it was a pretty good fucking episode, especially
considering
with all the little hiccups.
Yeah.
They weren't even little hiccups. They were like fucking explosions, like left and right. And we're like, fuck it, we're just going to keep going, right? Because that's what happens in life sometimes. So is it a little long? Yes, but we got to interview somebody that has seen firsthand of some of the traumatic experiences that they're witnessing and how to deal with it and how to cope with that. So with that, we will leave. Don't get in the fucking sinking boat with them.
Yeah.
Don't get in the boat. But also get your shit together. Just kidding. Just remember that everything is a process. Remember to be gentle with yourselves. I know this was a lot in one episode, and that's exactly why I didn't bomb you with fucking everything under the sun. Because this is literally just a little chip in that iceberg we call life. So I look forward to talking with all you guys next week. Technically not with you, just to you. Yeah, like a motivational speaker. It's fine. At you. At you. I will talk to you guys next week. Have a wonderful fucking week.